Thank you, Don. When Don Reed asked me to speak today, I first thought you might wonder why is an Aussie here speaking on Memorial Day weekend to honour America's finest and all that they've done to serve their country. I'm very glad to be here to be able to honour the USS San Francisco because it really made a lasting impact on the fate of Australia. And when I look back on the history of time and the remarkable sacrifice and impact the United States Armed Forces have made to sustain peace, protect freedom, and defend the security of many countries, they very much truly did that for Australia. My deepest thanks today is really to all the members here that have served for the United States Armed Forces, past and present. And I trust my remarks today will give you a little bit of a different perspective on the great difference and the impact that the crew of the US San Francisco made to many countries, and in fact my country, Australia. If it were not for the great sacrifice of the crew of the USS San Francisco and many like her throughout the region during that time, the struggle to win over the Pacific would not have happened, and likely fellow Australians such as myself really would not have been able to grow up and live in a world of peace and prosperity. It's been 66 years since the USS San Francisco made her final voyage home. It's been 67 years since the end of World War II, and many calls to arms since then. The memories of war may have faded around the edges for some, although the fine gentleman I spoke to this morning, it certainly has not. But what is really emblazoned in history is the courage and impact that they made on the world. The impact that these men have made and women have made over time will last forever. It's the peace that we have today that really is the result of the sacrifice that they made. As Don mentioned, the crew of the USS San Francisco lay a very important building block on what has always remained steadfast. That is the partnership between the Australian people and government and that of the great country of the United States of America. It's a partnership that's really built on common goals, a connection through mateship, and most importantly, a partnership in protecting peace and security of the Pacific. Throughout the past century, American and Australian servicemen and women have stood side by side through times of peace and war. We have stood side by side in every major conflict with the United States of America, every major conflict that we've seen. We've stood by with a common belief that great prosperity arises through times of peace and protecting security, and the stability of all people is imperative for the aspirations of growth. Our alliance really reaches far back, and I wanted to say thank you to Don for asking me to speak today because it gave me an opportunity to learn more about my country and learn more about the United States of America, something in this day and age we probably don't spend enough time looking at. I think you'll be probably really interested to know that in 1905, Australia was a very isolated and sparsely populated country. It had a population of 4 million people. It was concerned at that time, 1905, with Japanese military movements in the South Pacific. And Australia's Prime Minister of the day, Alfred Deakin, saw that isolation was not the only means of protection. He looked to the United States of America to create a zone of security. President Teddy Roosevelt's Secretary of State of the day, Elihu Root, sent the US Great White Fleet into Sydney Harbour. It was welcomed by 1 million Australians, 1/4 of the entire population of the country. So inspiring was the Great White Fleet into Sydney Harbour that the decision was made to create the Royal Australian Navy. It was commissioned thereafter and can really date back to the impact that the United States Navy made on visiting our country. This lasting impact would grow and really come to the fore many, many times, but no more than what it did in World War II. World War II tested the conviction of this partnership over and over again. No more than in 1942, when the Japanese military force really had taken a stranglehold on the Pacific. I was very, very interested to learn that in 1942, we also suffered a horrendous attack. 242 Japanese aircraft attacked our city of Darwin in the north, it was protected by US and Australian servicemen. The USS Perry actually sunk in the battle and has its final resting place off the shore in Darwin. We fought side by side. At that time, the Japanese had taken a stranglehold on the Pacific. A critical part of this battle was that for the Coral Sea, just off the coast of Australia. One island, the island of Guadalcanal, was critical to dominate the region. It would be the turning point of the Pacific War and change the course of history and the fate of Australia. Loss would have really marked the end of US aid to Australia and would have exposed Australia to a possible mainland invasion. After the US had captured the island of Guadalcanal and the critical airport field there of Henderson Field, the Japanese Navy was sent to essentially wipe the US Marines off the island. This is when the USS San Francisco came to the fore. As the Japanese Navy prepared to attack the US Marines on that evening in November, the USS San Francisco took the Japanese force head-on, with a group of ships in the dead of night. This major sacrifice in the face of overwhelming odds was summarized best when I read the presidential citation from President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and I summarized just part of it, and I think it's really important to really read all of it, but I summarized part of it when the president said, "A very powerful Japanese force was moving at night towards our positions in the Solomon Islands. The spearhead of the force that we sent to intercept the enemy was under the command of Rear Admiral Daniel J. Callahan. He was aboard the leading ship, the cruiser San Francisco. The San Francisco sailed right into the enemy fleet, right through the whole enemy fleet, her guns blazing. She engaged and hit 3 enemy vessels, sinking one of them. At point-blank range, she engaged an enemy battleship, heavy in her superior in size and firepower. The San Francisco herself was hit many times. Admiral Callahan, my close personal friend, and many of his gallant officers and men gave their lives in battle. Let us thank God for such men as these. May our nation continue to be worthy of them throughout this war and forever." The USS San Francisco earned 17 battle stars, but that was the character of the men on the USS San Francisco. She always seemed to be in the thick of the fighting right throughout the war. As I reflect on the battle in November 1942, I was struck that this was a major turning point in the Pacific. It marked essentially the beginning of victory in the Pacific. How fortunate Australia was to have an ally in the United States and a group of brave men leading the charge and during a pivotal moment in history. Thankfully, such bravery has been passed on. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, everyone.
Thankfully, such bravery was passed on through generations. The sacrifice of those who took part in the battle lives on in the strength and vitality of the US-Australian relationship, an alliance that has seen it grow from strength to strength over the last 70 years. Today, our countries hold fast on a partnership that's true. It was formed over a century ago with the same very grit and determination. Just 3 weeks ago, on May the 7th, 2012, the Australian government announced that the United States shipwrecks from the Battle of the Coral Sea are now protected in their final resting place by Australian law. The USS San Francisco made a lasting impact that has lasted the test of time, and may forever we be thankful. After World War II, the Australia, New Zealand and United States signed a defence treaty in 1951 here in San Francisco, actually here in the Presidio. Invoking the treaty some 50 years later, Australia sent and was the first to send assistance to the United States on the dreadful day of September 11th, 2001. We in fact lost 22 Australians that day as well. This mateship, coming to the aid of your most precious friend when it's needed, was really set many years ago by the crew of the USS San Francisco. This battle tested the bond of conviction and friendship, and it really has increased over time. We stand side by side with the United States of America, and I pay respect to all US service members here today, past and present, and thank you personally for your service. To all those who have served aboard the USS San Francisco, I say thank you. We honour you and your shipmates today. I also say thank you to all that served on the nuclear submarine USS San Francisco, who has been protecting these shores for 30 years. As I reflect on the period of time today, I really think of all that I've left out. The many individual stories of great men like Chief Johnny Johnson, who I had the privilege to spend time with this week. He was there that day, and he's here with us today, and I think that is just a blessing that we all have to be able to spend time with the men that were there. So I say thank you to Chief, thank you to shipmates, may God bless you, may God bless the USS San Francisco and this great country, and I hope in some way I've been able to convey some gratitude that we have for the sacrifice that your crew made. It's a real privilege to be here today with my sons. They're in many ways, I think, the future of our great country. They're both American and Australian. And I think we can only really reflect and pay real thanks to all the people that went before us. It's a privilege to be here today. I thank you for the invitation, and may God bless you all. Thank you.